Ionescu, she got it! And Stewart doing it all.
That is what makes her special.
Hey Liberty fans, I'm your host François and welcome to Liberty FM. 8 months ago, Jonathan Kolb introduced Chris DeMarco as the coach who could take the New York Liberty to another level. Tactical excellence, accountability, adaptability, championship habits. 37 games later, the Liberty are 22-15, the exact same record they had at this point last season under Sandy Brandello, and many of the same problems are still there. The offense has evolved, the ideas are there, but defensively, the same breakdowns keeps happening, the same leads keeps disappearing, and when things starts going wrong too often, nobody seems able to stop the bleeding. So was Chris DeMarco really the coach this team needed? And did Jonathan Kolb build the right roster for his vision? Because in New York, winning games isn't the standard. Winning championships is. And as the saying goes, offense wins games, defense wins championship. So we have a lot of questions to answer, so let's get into it. The focus of this episode is going to be on two people, Chris DeMarco and Jonathan Kolb. As the Liberty were getting ready to face the Los Angeles Sparks, I noticed something during the introductions. After the players were announced, Chris DeMarco's name came over the speakers, and once again, there were boos. Now, some of that was probably still frustration of the Benaja-Laney-Hamilton situation, which I talked about extensively in the previous episode, but I think it's deeper than Benaja. I think what we're hearing from some Liberty fans is frustration over a growing disconnect between what Jonathan Kolb sold us when he introduced Chris DeMarco as the new head coach of the New York Liberty in December 2025 and what we're actually watching on the court 8 months later. And I want to make something clear before going any further. I don't question Chris DeMarco's love for basketball. He's cerebral. He thinks deeply about basketball. And there are legitimate things I like about what he's trying to implement. But at times he seems to struggle to communicate that passion to his players and galvanize his team when they need it most. And the contrast in personality between him and Sandy Brandello couldn't be clearer. Sandy was loved and appreciated by a majority of Liberty fans, and from everything we could see, by our players. But eventually, everybody understood that we had reached the end of a cycle. The team wasn't responding to our methods in the same way anymore. A change was needed. Being likable couldn't prevent that point of no return. And that's important because if you're going to make that change, if you're going to move on from the coach who helped bring New York its first WNBA championship, the next question becomes, what are you replacing her with? I've been paying much closer attention over the past few months to what Jonathan Kolb says publicly, and something has started bothering me. There sometimes seems to be a parallel world between what we're being told and what's actually happening. And it started for me in the offseason with Natasha Cloud. Look, even though Cloud resonated tremendously with the fans and with the Brooklyn community, you could understand basketball-wise why the Sabrina Ionescu-Natasha Cloud combination wasn't necessarily the best fit. And that's fine. Basketball decisions happen. But those decisions can also be communicated. When Kolb later discussed Cloud's departure, he had nothing but praise for her. He called her a phenomenal teammate, acknowledged what she had meant to the Liberty, and essentially explained that New York was pursuing all the free agent opportunities in an incredibly condensed market. He even acknowledged that being left in the dark while the Liberty pursued those opportunities probably didn't feel good. But then you listen to Natasha Cloud tell her side of the story and suddenly that framing feels very different. Cloud says she had gone to the organization before free agency. She understood they might pursue another star. She wasn't asking them not to. What she asked for was transparency. She essentially told them, if you're moving in another direction, just tell me, don't blindside me. And according to Cloud, that's exactly what happened anyway. She went through virtually the entire free agency period without knowing whether New York wanted her back. She talked about being confused, hurt, and eventually terrified that she might not even have a place in the WNBA. And that's the part that bothers me. The problem wasn't simply that the Liberty decided to move on from Natasha Cloud. The problem was that she specifically asked them to have the difficult conversation with her, and according to her, they didn't. So when Jonathan Kolb later acknowledges that she was left in the dark, that's particularly striking. Because according to Natasha Cloud, being left in the dark was precisely what she had asked the Liberty to make sure it didn't happen. And then of course, we had the entire Benaja-Laney-Hamilton saga, which I discussed in the previous episode. Different circumstances, but once again, questions about communication, and that's why I started going back to December. Let's go back to Chris DeMarco's introductory press conference. Jonathan Kolb spoke glowingly about him and about the process that led to his hiring. The Liberty even released an unlocked episode showing how meticulous and collaborative the organization had been throughout the search. The message was clear. They weren't just hiring another coach. They believed they had found the person who could take this team to another level. 8 months later, when you're watching this team struggle with many of the same issues they had last year, you have to start revisiting some of those statements. So let's do that.
When we stepped back at the end of the season, we started to evaluate not just the job description for the head coaching position with the New York Liberty, but really where the game of basketball is going within the WNBA. And we asked ourselves as a group, what qualities are essential to build a team that relentlessly pursues championships while also setting the standard within the WNBA? And so we came up with criteria that we felt were non-negotiables for our future. And so to go over some of those, we needed somebody with elite level tactical competence, somebody who's a leader that possesses a deep curiosity for the game of basketball, but also an unwavering drive to uncover every possible strategic edge.
Now, in that regard, I actually think they deserve some credit because offensively, you can see what Chris DeMarco is trying to do. There's more variety than there was under Sandy, whose offense could become stagnant at times. And if you really want to dive deep into all the different sets the Liberty are running, I strongly recommend Lucas Kaplan's work on X. He did the gigantic task of creating an inventory of these players and analyzing their effectiveness against different teams. If you love learning about basketball, it's fascinating stuff. And you can see how some of DeMarco's concepts, the screening, the movements, the different actions, have put players like Stewie, Maureen Johannes, and JJ in positions to succeed. Could more still be done to maximize their talent? Absolutely. I still don't think DeMarco has completely figured out how to maximize Sabrina, particularly when she's paired with another point guard. But offensively, there is a blueprint. The problem is execution. Early in the season, you could see the players setting screens, moving, trying to execute everything exactly as designed, but sometimes it felt almost too scholarly, too rehearsed, too robotic. And that's interesting because on August 11th, Madeline Caney of the New York Post reported on the players-only meeting where Breanna Stewart explained the message she gave her teammates. Quote, because I think sometimes when you're trying to do everything that the coaches want or trying to play perfectly, it becomes a little bit robotic. And it was more so like, play your game. That was the message to the players. End of quote. Think about that. In that moment, Stewie became the leader the team needed. She helped free them mentally. They often started clicking better and the Liberty won 7 of 8 games during that stretch. So yes, tactically I can see some of what Jonathan Kolb was talking about, but then we get to another part of his criteria.
We needed somebody that understands the habits that go into building a dynasty. Somebody that's been in a championship culture and understands the cost of greatness, but equally as important, the accountability that's required to sustain that greatness.
Now we're getting somewhere, because DeMarco's experience with the Golden State Warriors is undeniably valuable. You don't spend that much time around Steph Curry, Draymond Green, Steve Kerr, and that organization without learning something about championship basketball. But basketball isn't just X and O's. Coaching isn't just knowing what should happen. You have to understand your league, your players, its codes, its personalities, and you have to take all of that knowledge and make it work in the environment you're entering. That's why something DeMarco said during his introductory press conference caught my attention.
And I have a lot to learn about the space. So I'm going to spend the time, over the next few months and keep growing and keep learning. And, hopefully by the time the season starts, we'll be ready to go.
Then when he was asked specifically how he was preparing himself to coach women.
We had 3 games in 4 nights, so I still am doing my assistant coaching role with the Golden State Warriors. But any free time I have, I'm pouring into this. I've probably ordered every book on the New York Liberty like you can find online. And I've always watched as a fan, right? So now I have to shift my focus and watch as a coach. So there's a lot to go back and watch, but I'm a massive basketball fan, and I love every second of it. So I'm going to continue to lean into that, continue to learn about the history of the WNBA, the history of the Liberty. And as we enter the 30th season of the WNBA and the franchise, it's just a really exciting time.
Now, I'm not sure how many books about the New York Liberty are out there or how much they're going to help you prepare for this particular coaching job, but joking aside, that answer didn't exactly fill me with confidence, because this was his first full-time professional head coaching job, and it wasn't just any job. This was the New York Liberty, a championship roster, a championship market, championship expectations, and there are moments this season where that learning curve has become visible. August 11th against the Indiana Fever was a perfect example. To me, this was going to be a measuring stick game. The Liberty had been winning, but some of those wins had come against lesser opponents. Indiana was different, and before the game, DeMarco basically identified everything New York needed to do. Protect the paint, run shooters off the three-point line, give Indiana's dangerous guards different looks, control their pace, and when Indiana starts scoring in bunches, stop the bleeding. Then the game started, and almost everything he had identified fell apart. Indiana made 11 of 14 threes in the first half. They built a 21-point lead. They finished with 106 points while shooting 16 of 24 from three. Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell combined for 50 points, and the Liberty repeatedly struggled to contain the ball, rotate, and recover to shooters. This wasn't Indiana exposing something Chris DeMarco had not anticipated. They were exposing the exact problems he had identified before the game, and the Liberty still couldn't stop them. And yes, you could argue Indiana had an extraordinary shooting night. They did. But when the Liberty have repeatedly allowed opponents to reach double figures in made threes since early July, at some point it starts being an anomaly. It becomes a pattern. And if the coach knows what his team needs to take away but the opponent repeatedly gets exactly what he says he wants to prevent, how effective is the game plan in the first place? Then came DeMarco's post-game press conference, and this is where the communication piece becomes important to me. He quickly gravitated towards the positive.
And again, they hit tough shots and they made a run, but we're going to continue to believe in our entire roster, and they've been phenomenal. And again, they shot the hell out of it. And obviously, I got 3 players made 4 threes, and another made 3. Great shooting night from them. And sometimes you got to just tip your cap. And I think offensively, the way we were rebounding the ball on our glass, we shot 11 for 36 from 3. Some of those go in. It's a different game. But again, second half, I thought we really played our style.
But the longer he explained what happened, the more he seemed to undermine his own argument.
Yeah, I said it earlier. We have to be better in our rotations. We have to have second and third efforts. And again, if we're going to commit to taking the pain away, which I think we've done a pretty good job, and as evidenced by like our rebounding and our lack of putting teams on the line, I think at times like people are going to get open threes. And of course, we got to do a better job and get better contests. But tough game for us in the way they shot the ball.
Those were the exact areas he had said before the game were improving. He had warned that Indiana could score in bunches. He had literally talked about stopping the bleeding. Then Indiana went 7 for 7 from 3 during the second quarter and built a 21-point lead. So which is it? Was this simply a great shooting team having a ridiculous shooting night? Or did the Liberty fail to execute the defensive principles their own coach had identified as essential before the game? Because Chris DeMarco's own post-game answers suggest it's at least partly the latter. And that's where I go back to Jonathan Kolb's words, accountability. Because when I look around this league, I see coaches handle these moments very differently. Listen to Cheryl Reeve after Minnesota's surprising home loss to the Sparks on August 6th.
Yeah, let's talk about our offense. Is that what we're going to do? Let's talk about our offense. We lost our game because we don't play defense. So you want to talk about offense? You sound like the players.
Yes, defensively, what wasn't there tonight?
46 points in the paint. 46 points in the paint. Literally, a team can get whatever they want on us. Doesn't matter the action. Doesn't matter which personnel you go against. They get anything they want. That's what I watched for 40 minutes. Actually, we played well for the first 4 minutes of the game. It's a shame that they have to keep playing hard for the rest of the game. That's really difficult on them.
I mean, on the defense, it feels like you've been talking about it for all of July. I mean, was it kind of similar problems of guards not guarding out on the perimeter, or did it feel kind of like
every player at every position was terrible? Every player that played the game at every position.
There's no ambiguity there. Now listen to Becky Hammond after Las Vegas lost by 31 points to Minnesota last season on July 25th.
In the second, we couldn't get any stops. The defense was atrocious. No, there's no ifs and it was atrocious.
What specifically do you feel like went wrong with the defense, or what are you seeing that's causing those breakdowns?
No communication. People not on the same page. Not executing a scheme. Got one person doing this, another person doing that. That's communication. That's discipline. That's being a professional basketball team, is the ability to execute a scheme defensively. And we could not. I liked our physicality coming out in the first quarter, but I mean, they were slipping out behind us, getting runouts in transition, like getting layups, miscommunications on guard to guard actions. The my bads add up.
And just to follow up, like, how do you move forward from that going into the matchup against Dallas to kind of fix those things with such little turnaround?
You get up the next day and you go to work and you keep teaching and you keep coaching and you keep encouraging and you keep trying to will them there. That's the only way I know how is you just go back to work. You learn, you teach, you encourage, and you go back to work and you correct them and you love on them hard and you just keep at it. You just keep at it.
Again, she's not sugarcoating it, but Becky also has an ability to challenge her players while thinking about what she needs to change as a coach. And what happened after that? Very few people expected it. A 16-game winning streak, a WNBA championship. If that's not a coach putting her imprint on the team, I don't know what is. And then there's Natalie Nakase, Coach of the Year in her first season with the Golden State Valkyries. Listen to how she handled a loss to Las Vegas in May.
Today, you guys were relying on the offense too much and not creating off of your defense. Is that kind of how you evaluate what happened today too?
We didn't rely on it, but we just allowed it to dictate the flow. So just to make sure we're saying the same thing, yeah. If we weren't making shots early, we just kind of allowed it kind of to dictate, I think, our fight. And that was something we know. We rely on our defense. It starts there. So we just have to make sure we stay on top of it.
You talked about the dictating defense needs to dictate us, not offense. And this is the second game that Gabby has come up here after a loss and said that. Yeah. And I'm curious, what do you need to do to fix that? Or how do you change that mindset in a game when we're letting the offense dictate how we're playing and not letting the defense like we want it to dictate the way we're going?
Starts with my leadership. It's what I'm saying to them. It's how I'm prepping them. So it starts with me. I got to correct my message. I got to deliver better. I have to be better because they're only going to go based off of, the messages that I'm sending.
That's what I find interesting about these three coaches. Sometimes they go directly at their players, sometimes they put the responsibility on themselves, sometimes they protect their players. But whatever approach they choose, you feel their presence. You feel who's steering the ship. Becky Hammon won a championship in her first season. Cheryl Reeve won her first championship with Minnesota in her second. Nakase took an expansion franchise to the playoff in year one and has continued building one of the league's best defensive teams. With DeMarco, we're obviously going to have to wait until the end of the season before making a definitive judgment. But right now, there are legitimate questions about whether he can have that same kind of imprint on this Liberty team. And that brings me to another thing Jonathan Kolb said.
When you look at Chris, he spent 14 years inside of the Golden State Warriors organization, and that gave him a rare and invaluable perspective. He lived through a pivotal transition period of eras, and he watched a great foundation evolve into a historic dynasty, and he saw firsthand what it takes for a contending team to break through its ceiling, but then for that breakthrough success to become repeatable. And I think it's important to note, he did not just witness that transformation, but his fingerprints were all over it. And then when you look at his experience as a head coach with the Bahamas national team, he orchestrated a historic run, and he led a program to unprecedented success. And in that role, he demonstrated an elite ability to quickly adapt. He was adapting to new rule sets, fluctuating rosters, in high-pressure elimination environments. And while doing so, he proved that he can do more than just manage a system, but he can build one that fits the talent in front of him. So when you take it all in, Chris possesses a rare combination of tactical savvy, emotional intelligence, as well as an unrelenting work ethic that aligns well with our players, as well as just like who we are as a franchise. So we believe that Chris is the right person at this time to unlock the full potential of our group and to lead the New York Liberty to the levels that we all expect.
Again, those are enormous compliments, but let's put his resume into perspective. When you look at Steve Kerr's tenure with the Golden State Warriors, the major assistants around him included people like Alvin Gentry, Ron Adams, Luke Walton, Mike Brown, and Kenny Atkinson. On the other end, Chris DeMarco worked his way through the Warriors organization. He came through video, scouting, and player development before becoming a full-time assistant in 2018. From 2018 through 2022, his responsibilities evolved between assistant coaching and player development, before he transitioned into solely an assistant coaching role from 2022 onward. That's valuable experience, but it's not the same as being the person making the final decision. His real head coaching experience came with the Bahamas national team. And international basketball is valuable, but you're working in short windows around FIBA competitions. That's very different from being responsible for the New York Liberty every single day through an entire WNBA season. Practices, rotations, personalities, losing streaks, injuries, media pressure, game management, and championship expectations. That's a completely different job. And this is where we have to ask the uncomfortable question. If Sandy Brandello's philosophy was no longer aligned with management and you decided to go in another direction, shouldn't the new direction eventually look better? Through 37 games, Chris DeMarco is 22-15. And here's what's striking about that. That's the exact same record Sandy Brandello had through 37 games last season. So after changing coaches, changing the system, and talking about tactical excellence, adaptability, accountability, and finding every possible strategic edge, the Liberty have arrived at exactly the same place in the standings through 37 games, except Sandy reached that point while dealing with a much broader injury crisis. She had a 9-game stretch without Jonathan Jones, Breanna Stewart missed 12 of the first 36 games. That team ultimately lost 122 player games because of health issues. Now, DeMarco has dealt with injuries too. Satu Sabali, Sabrina Ionescu, and Leonie Fibish have all missed time, but he's had Stewie and JJ available far more consistently, and yet, 37 games into the season, the record hasn't improved. That's not me saying Sandy should still be the coach. I've already said that I understood why that cycle needed to end. Sometimes a team needs a different voice, even after having success together. But if you're going to replace a championship winning coach because you believe somebody else can elevate this group, at some point we have to see the elevation. And through 37 games, at least when you look at the record, we haven't. And this is where Kolb's description of DeMarco as someone with an elite ability to quickly adapt becomes particularly interesting. Because let's talk about the Sparks. On August 13th, the Liberty entered the fourth quarter with a 28-point lead. 28. This game should have been over. Instead, Ray Burrell attacked off a double screen, used her athleticism, and got an N1. Then the Spark hit consecutive threes, and suddenly you could feel the game changing. The second three was particularly frustrating. Burrell and Cameron Brink collided. New York continued playing, missed in transition, and Erica Wheeler quickly got the ball back to Burrell, who had stayed on the other end. Sabrina and Pauline Astier didn't sort out the coverage. Wide open three. Then another one from Cameron Brink. And this is where one of the Liberty's recurring defensive problems showed up again. Overhelping. New York collapses towards the ball. Somebody is left open on the perimeter and good teams punish you. It's a 12-0 run. Marine Futux tries a cross-court skip pass, turnover. Burrell hits another mid-range jumper. Meanwhile, New York's offense has completely lost its rhythm. 4 shots, turnovers, Sabrina forcing threes, and Burrell on the other end gets another right wing free after being left open following a switch with JJ. Now it's a 19-0 run, and still no timeout from Chris DeMarco. Sabrina afterwards misses another free, and Burrell misses at the other end, but Cameron Brink grabs the offensive rebound and scores inside. 21-0. A 21-0 run, and Chris DeMarco still hasn't called a timeout, and then finally play stop, except the timeout doesn't come from DeMarco. It comes because Stewie commits an offensive foul and Cameron Brink is hurt. So essentially the situation gives you the stoppage that you weren't willing to take yourself. And that's what worries me, because where's the command of the game? Where's the coach saying enough? Sit down, let's reset this. Eventually Sabrina Ionescu stops the bleeding by attacking the basket. But on the next defensive possession, another rotation problem, another Burrell free from the right wing. The Sparks eventually made it to a 1-point game with less than 30 seconds remaining. But thankfully enough, the Liberty survived. But I'm sorry, when you enter the fourth quarter up by 28 points and the opponent has a chance to beat you in the final 30 seconds, I don't walk away feeling great because you won. And this wasn't the first time against LA. On June 21st, the Liberty blew a 17-point lead against the Sparks. In the fourth quarter, LA cut an 8-point Liberty advantage to 3 in 41 seconds before DeMarco finally called timeout. By that point, the Sparks had erased 14 points of what had once been a 17-point cushion. So when Jonathan Kolb tells me about adaptability, these are the moments I'm watching. Then you play Connecticut, one of the worst teams in the league, the worst offense in the WNBA, and once again, the Liberty cannot sustain control. They come out flat defensively and trail 27-19 after the first quarter. Then they respond, a 15-0 run, JJ gets going, New York leads 46-37 at halftime. Okay, now put them away. Instead, Connecticut slowly gets back into the game. That 9-point halftime advantage becomes 63-62 early in the fourth quarter, against one of the worst offensive teams in basketball. And if it wasn't for some Marine Johannes magic, we're potentially talking about an embarrassing loss here. The Liberty won 82-75, but just like the Sparks game, it was one of those wins that somehow leaves you feeling worse about the team afterward. And then there was the Chicago game. And honestly, if I had to summarize that one, I'll just let Courtney Williams do the talking.
Y'all ain't beat Chicago?
Yeah, they didn't beat Chicago. The Liberty lost 93-86, and once again, some familiar problems showed up. Turnovers, rebounding, and too many extra possessions for the opponent. New York turned the ball over 17 times. Chicago grabbed 14 offensive rebounds and scored 20 second chance points. When you're already struggling to establish control of a game, you can't keep giving the other team additional opportunities like that. But there was another part of this game that goes directly back to what I've been saying about Chris DeMarco and his in-game adaptability. At one point, DeMarco went with a good chunk of his bench while resting several of his key players. Chicago, meanwhile, kept more of his starters on the floor, and they took advantage. That's one of those moments where I need to see DeMarco recognize what's happening and adapt quicker, because Chicago used that stretch to create separation, and from there, New York spent most of the game trying to climb its way back. The Liberty eventually did. They fought back and even briefly took the lead late, but then, of course, Natasha Cloud happened. Because if there was one player you probably didn't want having a career night against the Liberty after everything that happened this offseason, it was her. Cloud finished with a career-high 35 points, along with 9 rebounds and 6 assists against her former team. And considering everything we talked about earlier in this episode, how she specifically asked the Liberty for transparency, how she felt she was left in the dark, and how that relationship ultimately ended, the irony is impossible to ignore. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know exactly what was going through Natasha Cloud's mind, but come on, you know this one had to feel a little different, and she played like it did. 35 points, career high against her former team. Sometimes basketball writes the script for you. And that's ultimately where I am with this team. If this were another franchise, maybe we'd look at 22-14 and say, well, what's the problem? They're winning games, but this is not just any franchise. This is New York. This is a team with championship expectations. And more importantly, what was sold to us and what we're seeing right now feel like two different things. The offense is better. I'll give Chris DeMarco that. There are more ideas, more movement, more creativity, but this team still hasn't shown me a clear defensive identity. And in the playoff, that could be the difference between another championship run and a very early off season, because everybody knows the saying, offense wins games, defense wins championship. And I don't think that saying could apply more perfectly to where the New York Liberty are right now. So where does that leave us? Maybe Chris DeMarco figures it out. Maybe 2 months from now, we look back at this stretch as the growing pains of a first-year WNBA head coach learning his team, learning this league, and eventually finding the right formula at exactly the right time. I'm not ruling that out, but right now, there are too many questions and not enough answers. Jonathan Kolb didn't just hire a new coach. He made a choice. He moved on from a championship-winning coach because he believed the Liberty needed something different to reach another level. He sold us adaptability, tactical excellence, accountability, emotional intelligence, championship habits. 37 games later, I'm still waiting to consistently see all of that translate into the court, because basketball isn't just played on a whiteboard. At some point, your ideas have to become your team's identity. When your opponent goes on a 21-0 run, somebody has to stop it. And when the same defensive rotations break down over and over again, somebody has to fix them. When your players start playing robotically, somebody has to free them. And when you know exactly what an opponent wants to do before the game and they still do exactly that to you, something isn't connecting. That's ultimately my biggest concern with Chris DeMarco. It's not whether he understands basketball, clearly he does. It's whether he can make this team understand and execute his basketball when everything starts going wrong. Because this is not the Bahamas national team. This is not being an assistant with the Golden State Warriors. This is New York. This is Breanna Stewart, JJ, Sabrina Ionescu. This is a franchise that won a championship in 2024 and decided that maintaining maintaining the status quo wasn't enough. Jonathan Kolb in the Liberty made a clear and conscious choice. Maybe it pays off. Maybe Chris DeMarco finds the elixir that unlocks the full potential of that team. Or maybe, the roster Jonathan Kolb constructed simply doesn't fit the vision of the coach he hired. And there's another possibility we have to consider. Maybe this is the collective vision. Maybe coach and management are aligned. And maybe the real problem is that the Liberty haven't adapted quickly enough to a WNBA landscape that has changed significantly since they won that championship in 2024. So I guess we'll find out, because the playoffs have a way of exposing everything. Every missed rotation, every open free, every offensive rebound, every blown assignment, every moment when you fail to stop the bleeding. The offense has shown us that this team can win games. Now the defense has to show us that this team can win a championship. So don't tell me what this team is supposed to be. Show me. The press conferences are over. Promises have been made. Now it's time for the basketball to speak. And if the New York Liberty still believe they're a championship team, it's time for them to start defending like one. And that will do for this episode of Liberty FM. The Liberty are back in action on Saturday, August 22nd for their final matchup of the season against the Indiana Fever. And after everything we talked about today, that Indiana game is definitely one I'll be watching closely. The last meeting exposed a lot of the defensive issues we discussed throughout this episode, so we'll see whether the Liberty can show that they've learned from it and respond differently this time around. As always, thank you so much for listening and supporting Liberty FM. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to follow the podcast and follow us on social media for more Liberty coverage. We'll be back very soon to break down what comes next as we get closer and closer to the playoff. Until then, enjoy the games, take care of yourself, and as we always say, let's go Liberty!